following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
Good morning. I'm wearing two hats this morning. I am representing ABNY as its chairman, but also as a board member of the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association, who is co-hosting the breakfast with us. I want to particularly thank Bobby Douglas and Liz Berger, who have done so much for you. You can definitely give them applause. So much for downtown, working tirelessly through our many ups and downs over the last couple of decades. And I think if everybody read the article this morning in the New York Times about the recovery, and particularly of the office segment, which is so important, almost 90 million feet of space in Lower Manhattan, and everybody, again, right after Sandy would say, well, New York downtown will not come back to what it was. And I think we've proven again, with a lot of hard work, literally working 24/7 in some cases to get our buildings back up and running. We've done it. We're almost at, I think, close to over 95% of the buildings that were impacted are back online. And significant amount of money was spent, a lot of effort. And so just want to thank Bobby and Liz for their commitment to downtown and making sure that we continue moving Lower Manhattan forward, and I'm sure Chuck will be talking about that in his comments. We need to work together with all the stakeholders like we always done as we move forward now into figuring out what to do long term. And that's going to be a major point of discussion, and we thank Chuck for his leadership on obtaining the federal money. We all worked very hard. Many people in this room and outside the room, helping Chuck, who was really the quarterback to make sure that Lower Manhattan, downtown, the rest of the city, the rest of the state, New Jersey and Connecticut got their fair share. It took a little time, but at the end, it was worth it. So thank you all for doing what you do and making sure that Lower Manhattan and this entire city and region recovers. I want to just introduce a few distinguished people who have joined us this morning. We have Congressman Jerry Nadler. Jerry, thank you for joining us. Another great friend of ABNY in our city, the newly elected Vice Chair of the Democratic Conference, Joe Crowley. Joe, thank you for joining us. I believe State Senator Jeff Klein, who leads the Independent Democratic Conference, was supposed to be here. Minority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Senator Malcolm Smith were also supposed to be in attendance. State Assemblyman Brian Kavanaugh, our great friend Mayor David Dinkins. David, thank you for always being here. I was shown a picture this morning of the Senator and David Dinkins and my dad at an ABNY function probably 15 years ago, and you guys look as good today as you did back then. So, Queens District Attorney Dick Brown is here with us, along with DA Cy Vance from Manhattan, and council members Dan Garotnik and Jessica Lappin and Robert Jackson, and our friend at EDC, Seth Pinsky, who is the mayor's point man on sustainability and recovery for the city, and we look forward to hearing your vision and ideas for continued recovery. Fire Commissioner Sal Casano, and Investigation Commissioner Rose Gilhurin, and also Landmark Commissioner Bob Tierney is with us. You can give them a nice round of applause. We also have Canada's Deputy Consul General, Danielle Atoye. So thank you for joining us, Consul General. Representing Labor, we have Hector Figueroa, the newly elected president of 32BJ, Gary LaBarbera from the Building Construction Council, and Ed Christensen from the Operating Engineers. Thank you all for joining us. It is my pleasure to welcome back New York State Senior Senator Chuck Schumer. Over the past 3 decades, Chuck has done an incredible job and built his reputation as a leader in finding common solutions to national issues and serving tirelessly as an advocate for New York. Since 1998, Chuck has made improving New York's economy his top priority in Washington. He has delivered for New Yorkers time and again, in particular after 9/11, the $20 billion to help with the recovery. And you see that work every day as you walk around Lower Manhattan. Just across the street, the Trade Center site is a shining example of our recovery and the tremendous amount of money for infrastructure that is so important for the future of our city. And then obviously, as I mentioned, the $60 billion in disaster relief for Sandy. Chuck was reelected in 2004 and serves as on the Senate Finance Committee, chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and he has recently served as the head of the inaugural committee, which he did an incredible job promoting New York all over the world. So thank you on that, Chuck. That was amazing. Currently, Chuck serves as vice chair of the Democratic Conference, the #3 position in the Democratic leadership. You have made us proud, Chuck, and we're honored to have you back this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Senator Chuck Schumer. I gave you some water down here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's better than ice in the winter. It is great to be here. I want to thank Bill for the great job he does. The picture he showed me was of the mayor. I think I was then Congress member and his dad, and I wrote under the picture, ABNY forever. So I thank all of the people who make ABNY the great organization that it is today, and thank Bill for continuing the Rudin family's, I guess it's third generation, soon to be fourth, of dedication to our city and our community. Bill acknowledged everyone, but there's one person he didn't, and I certainly want to, and that is my wife, the Vice Chancellor of City University. He saved that for me. And so, I want to thank everyone for being here, and this morning what I wanted to do is discuss Hurricane Sandy aid and rebuilding, but also a subject that's just as important and we have to start thinking about right now. How we pivot to phase 2 of rebuilding and create a long-term plan to protect New York from future storms, rising seas, and global warming. In the beginning of the speech, I'll discuss the long and difficult path, a path we all walk together day in, day out to get the $60 billion in aid for New York, and I'll touch on what's in the bill that will help our city and our state recover and rebuild stronger. The second part of my speech will address the phase 2 of rebuilding, how we protect our city for years to come from future storms, which we know will occur, rising seas and global warming. I made sure that Congress provided money in the Sandy bill for an important but not very expensive very first step of phase 2, a comprehensive Army Corps study on how to protect New York. This study will deliver the recommendation and steps we need to take to protect New York, and that's when the hard work begins. We will need billions more in aid to protect New York over the long term. And this is a monumental task. It'll be even harder to obtain than the first Sandy bill, but is every bit as important to the future of New York. So our work to protect New York has just begun. Even though we've got the $60 billion for Sandy, we know that our seas are rising, our planet is getting warmer, and storms like Sandy will certainly be more frequent. We cannot let parts of New York get swept away. Our city is too important. For all of us, this city is in our blood, it's in our veins. So we can't wait another 2 or 5 or 10 years for another Sandy before we begin to put in place permanent protections. Now's the time to begin to seize that opportunity. So, first, what the support has meant for New York City in the past, federal support. As we all know, we have suffered 2 terrible disasters in the last 12 years. While they're different, 9/11 was man-made, Sandy was natural. On 9/11, we suffered a much greater loss of life, while Sandy had a bigger economic impact There are many analogies to be made. New York suffered a terrible emotional and physical blow on 9/11. It was an event that shocked New York, the country, and the world. However, and I remember those days vividly, I don't think New Yorkers ever felt alone after 9/11. America rallied to us. We felt the true support of an entire country behind us. But there were real concerns. I remember in the months after Sandy, the prognostications were that no one would be below Canal Street, that many of our leading financial service industries would want to move far away, and that no one would want to take up residence. Lower Manhattan, people predicted, would become a ghost town. This was a scenario I was deathly afraid of, and I knew we'd need a big investment to revive and provide a shot of adrenaline to downtown. And that is why, in the day after, or 2 days after the horrible tragedy of 9/11, I was in the Oval Office describing to the President with Senator Clinton the devastation we had seen, we had just visited. And I'll never forget the smell of death in the air, actually the smell of burnt bodies, hundreds of people standing with signs. Never forget this. Have you seen my brother, Bill? Have you seen my daughter, Mary? It was awful. And I went back after speaking to both Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani, and in the Oval Office, after I explained to the President why, about the devastation we saw, and we knew he was coming up the next day, I told him, you had already promised the nation $20 billion to protect our defenses, but you didn't mention New York. New York needs $20 billion, and we'd like your commitment for that. The President, I thought he'd say, let me study it. Give me a piece of paper. He said, New York needs $20 billion. I said, at least that, Mr. President. He said, you got it. And I gave him a hug. Then we went outside to all the media, and the President gave his little talk. He didn't mention the $20 billion, but of course I did. And you could see, as I said, and the President promised an additional $20 billion for New York. His jaw dropped. The collective jaw of his staff just dropped. But to his credit, he never backed off from that commitment, even years later. And obviously, the $20 billion came swiftly. It showed the world that America had doubled down on New York as its economic, cultural capital. As New Yorkers, we proved that we were determined to build New York back, stronger than ever. And now we're seeing that investment pay off with the Lower Manhattan. We rebuilt our transportation infrastructure, and the federal government helped finance construction of the New World Trade Center, all benefits we are starting to see and realize today, 10 years later. Many businesses have committed to downtown, many new businesses. Many more continue to do so as new office buildings and transportation hubs approach completion. But what's most amazing is that now Lower Manhattan is flourishing as a residential neighborhood when people predicted after 9/11 the people who were there would leave. We have 3 times as many people living south of Chambers Street than we did the day before 9/11. So it's an amazing thing. And we've seen benefits of the stimulus investments and the previous investments, East Side Access, 2nd Avenue Subway, Moynihan Station. I take special pride in the number 7 train expansion, which is opening the west side of Manhattan to development and investment, envisioned long ago during the Group of 35 report that I commissioned in 1999. Mayor Bloomberg and Council Speaker Quinn have done a great job delivering this project for New York. Put all these projects together, you begin to see a framework of a 21st century post-9/11 New York City. It's no wonder that private investment is flowing at historic levels into places like Hudson Yards, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, and the financial district. So, after 9/11, the federal government reinvested and rebuilt New York, and the private sector support followed. We know this model works. And the model of 9/11 is important as we turn to our current crisis, Hurricane Sandy. After 9/11, we needed a quick and massive commitment of the federal government once again to assure New Yorkers that we'd rebuild and come back stronger. And we faced that challenge following Sandy. Just as I was afraid that Lower Manhattan would become a ghost town after 9/11, The prospect of abandoning our shorelines would scare any New Yorker who knows how connected we are to our harbor, whether it's in densely built Manhattan or out in the Rockaways and Seagate. We all know that in the years following the passage of federal programs to help us rebound from 9/11, programs that have been vital to New York, a group of far-right members came to Washington. Jerry and Joe know this well because they run the House. And they had the exclusive goal of shrinking government regardless of the consequences or human costs, and at great cost to coherent, long-term strategic planning. Emergency funds for New York were almost a casualty of this movement following Sandy. For New Yorkers, and for many others around the country, this was inexplicable, as we longed to see the same swift commitment made after 9/11. While it's important that Congress tackle our budget and deficit issues, they're a very serious problem, disaster aid should not in any way be put on the chopping block. That's not who we are. The federal government has always stepped in to provide much-needed support following disasters, man-made or natural, and for over 100 years we've had this view. When natural disaster, the hand of God, strikes a region, even large localities are unable to deal with it themselves, and so we band together as a nation and send money. And for decades, New Yorkers have sent billions of dollars to deal with forest fires out west, or flooding in the Missouri and Mississippi river valleys, or hurricanes, whether it's Louisiana or Florida or South Carolina. And all of a sudden, we were worried that the rules would change when we were hit by a large natural disaster. So, it was an intense, hard fight to get the response that New York deserved. It was a harder fight, much harder fight than the 9/11 recovery funding. As President Bush did after 9/11, President Obama was great. He came to visit. He saw the damage firsthand. His administration helped us plan an adequate response. The President's request to Congress helped set the goalposts for what we in Congress could work towards. So it was important that the request was both financially adequate, but one that also provided funding in the necessary areas. While the administration was shaping the request, I had daily conversations with Sean Donovan. It is so important to have New Yorkers in high positions in Washington. He's the former HUD secretary. He became head of the Hurricane Sandy Building Task Force. He's a New Yorker, former HPD commissioner, and he understood instinctively what New York's needs were, and he had the trust of the administration. The week after Sandy hit, I invited Sean and Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano to dinner in Brooklyn. At that dinner, at the excellent grocery restaurant on Smith Street in Brooklyn, the three of us came up with an outline of both the form and function of New York's request. On form, we agreed that it must be a joint request from New York and New Jersey. We didn't want the two states competing for funding, but rather wanted to create a broad coalition with strong allies from both parties. This turned out to be the right move, and we were very glad to have Governor Christie, a Republican, on board. He was always available and showed that he wasn't afraid to take on his own party at crucial moments, and really deserves all New Yorkers' thanks. He did a great job. On function, I stressed that we couldn't have a bill that only allowed us to build back as we were before the storm. In other words, FEMA had always said, we'll let you exactly rebuild the way it was before. I had had a fight with FEMA about a hospital upstate. It was in a floodplain. It was totally flooded. FEMA said, you got to rebuild it there. They wanted to build it 500 yards up the hill so it wouldn't be flooded again. It took 2 years to change FEMA's mind. So, we stressed that we needed to have money for what was called mitigation, so that when we rebuilt, we would be somewhat more protected from future storms and other kinds of dangers like that. Coordinating with my colleagues, Senator Gillibrand, Lautenberg, and Menendez, we were also in constant contact with other key officials, such as OMB Director Jeff Zients, shaping what would become the presidential request. Along the way, we in the delegation had concerns that the first number might not be big enough to meet New York's deep and broad needs. We expressed those concerns to administration officials. Many were very receptive. We had a meeting late one night. We had consulted with Governors Cuomo, Christie, Mayor Bloomberg, and we really thought their number was too low. We stayed in my office, the four of us, 4 senators, 2 from New York, 2 from New Jersey, till 11 at night, and finally they said, $60 billion, okay. And that's how we got to that number. As I mentioned, we viewed mitigation as a key function of aid and pushed hard to secure an adequate amount. In other past disasters, as I mentioned, FEMA would just rebuild. There's over $7 billion, and considerably more if you look between the lines, but $7 billion explicitly secured for mitigation. Let me explain what this means. It means when the MTA rebuilds, say, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, they will also be allowed not to just rebuild it as it was, but to put in whatever measures they feel would prevent future flooding if, God forbid, the next Sandy occurs, whether it's steel doors at the entrance to the tunnel, or they now have these things that are sort of like giant airbags that prevent the water from flowing in. Switches from damaged electrical systems can be replaced with new state-of-the-art equipment. A lot of our switches are 100 years old in our subway system. They'll have the ability to reinvest in all of these new things. In the CDBG program, we put in money so houses could be elevated. Any of us who have walked along the Rockaways or out in Long Island and Long Beach, it's amazing. Even houses that were on the waterfront, those that were sort of elevated, had much less damage than those that were flat on the ground. And if you're going to give money, which we will, say $120,000 to rebuild your house, isn't it worth another $20,000 to raise it 3 feet so it won't be flooded again? There's money for that in the CDBG program. We got condos and co-ops treated. I know probably many of you Manhattanites live in condos and co-ops. I'm a Brooklynite, I live in a co-op. In the past, they were not able to receive grants for the damaged infrastructure because it was community property. Now they will. And in hospitals, I see Bob Grossman here, and he's done a great job as the helm of NYU during these difficult times. But they had all their equipment, you know, these fancy machines, in the basement. That's where the machine makers told them to be, because it has to be exactly calibrated in terms of elevation and all of that. They were all flooded, hundreds of millions of dollars, not just at NYU, but at Coney Island Hospital, where my wife's mother worked for 30 years, and at Long Beach Hospital and at Bellevue. There'll be money. It's going to be more expensive to put these new machines. When they get the new machines, they'll not only be reimbursed for them, but they'll be able to put them on the 3rd floor if they wish to avoid the kind of flood damage we had. That's the kind of thing mitigation allowed. It also allowed business interruption money for our small businesses. You go to the main shopping streets of Rockaway or Coney Island, 2/3 of the businesses are still not open. I happened to be in Island Park with my good friend Al D'Amato a few weeks ago. 60% of those businesses are not open. They will not be open unless they're able to get some mitigation expenses. A small business that has continued expenses can't do without 4 months of income. So there'll be help for that as well. And Con Ed and LIPA will be able to also better insulate their power supplies from future storms, not just rebuild as is. So mitigation was extremely important, and the administration delivered this strong request after we helped shape it. Now, I want to make one point clear. There was nothing in the Senate bill that wasn't disaster-related, but we've had a tradition in the Congress, and that is previous disasters and present disasters are sort of lumped together because we're going to need more money. Some others did too. Some people said, well, it's not Sandy-related. In the House, they had to take that money out, but none of it was pork. Every bit of it was disaster-related, even if it was disasters of Missouri River flooding or fisheries or whatever. And that's traditionally what's been done. That helped us get it through the Senate. We needed the votes of Republican senators, and that helped us get it. That was the glue. Probably more importantly in getting the bill through the Senate was the fact that Lautenberg, Menendez, Gillibrand, and I spoke to every senator, and we reminded them The world is changing. We never thought a storm would hit New York like this. Your area might be next. And if you don't allow the federal government to step in or put huge barriers in the way so the effort is meager, you'll regret it. Because when your area is hit, God forbid, you'll be in the same boat. That argument really made some sense. Denying disaster aid, we told our colleagues, was not something, not a precedent that they would want to set, and it worked. And finally, just a little bit of inside baseball, how the Senate works. This was a breakthrough moment. A friend of mine, Lamar, we had to get the bill passed in the Senate. We wanted to get it passed in the old Congress. Remember, this was late December. Tom Coburn, one of the very conservative senators, wanted to do 10 amendments and debate them as long as he wanted. And his Republican colleagues, as they do, they would back him up. They would say, hey, you got to allow these amendments. But we knew. But Lamar Alexander came over to me and said, Coburn's willing to talk. He's one of my good friends in the Senate. And I've worked with Coburn. Remember, Senator Gillibrand and I had a real breakthrough with him in getting the Commissioner Cassano the Zadroga money. And I went over in the Finance Committee and said, you have 10 amendments. We're willing to debate them. But how about a time limit, 20 minutes each? He said, yes. I said, how about on these certain ones, a 60-vote limit? He said, yes. No one thought he would. And then we even asked him to split a couple of the amendments because they had parts that were good and parts that were bad, and it was designed to cause us difficulty and embarrassment. He agreed to that as well. And so the Senate can work during emergencies. My good friend and leader, Harry Reid, said, you'll never get Coburn to agree to anything. But he did, and the bill passed. So that's just a little inside baseball. Anyway, then there was one other key element in getting the bill through the Senate and House, and that involves some of the people in this room. We knew that the House would be a tougher road than the Senate. So I called up Bill, I called up Kathy Wild, and I had a list of who had contributed, who from New York, they come up regularly for money, who had contributed to Senator McConnell, Speaker Boehner, and Leader Cantor. A lot of New Yorkers gave him a whole lot of money for a lot of reasons. I called them up. I said, you have to tell these folks that they have to be there for us. You cannot let them come to New York and keep raising money and here in our dire hour of need, either stand in the way or allow others to stand in the way. The effort kicked off in mid-December, and here are some of the people who really went to bat for us. Ken Langone, Lloyd Blankfein, Stephen Schwartzman, Henry Kravis, Terry Lundgren, and many others. And each of these people called 3, 4, 5 times. It really worked. Then chief executives at Macy's and JetBlue and Viacom had instructed their staff across the country to let their local lawmakers know. In other words, I think it was Viacom or Macy's had a big operation in Tennessee. They had all their Tennessee employees say, we need this help because New York buys a lot of our products and is our headquarters. We also organized a letter, Kathy Wild and the partnership, 125 chief executives signed a letter to congressional leaders, and guess who was our real champion on the Republican side in the House, aside, of course, from Peter King and Michael Grimm, who did a great job. You won't believe it, Eric Cantor. Eric Cantor became our champion. He was honorable throughout the whole process. We spoke frequently. He was an asset. When Speaker Boehner pulled the vote on New Year's Day, as you may remember, pulling the rug out from under us, it was Cantor who called me and pledged that a new vote would be held in the early days of the Congress. He said, I don't know if I'll vote for it or not, but I'll make sure you have the votes to do it. Fine with us. Governor Christie was a key ally. As I mentioned, King and Grimm took on their own party, and so the bill finally became law with a few modifications, but not much. We got our $60 billion, and we have the flexibility to rebuild in the right way. Now, so great, it's all done. Far from it. And the second part of my little speech here is about phase 2. preventing recurring damage from future weather-related disasters. All of the Sandy funding is a great first step. However, it's the equivalent of a budgetary one-shot. And as we move forward with short-term mitigation, the kind of mitigation I mentioned, we need simultaneously to focus on phase 2, a long-term plan to protect New York from future storms, weather-related disasters, and what we know will happen, the rising levels of the ocean, which is occurring much more quickly than we've ever imagined. The mitigation projects that we undertook with Sandy will make the damage from a future storm less severe and may delay, at least for a few years, the disastrous effect that rising sea levels will have on our city. But mitigation money will not inoculate and protect us from a future Sandy or the ruinous impact that sea level rise will have in low-lying areas of New York. And this is not 100 years away. This is a couple of decades away. And if you don't start doing it now, we're going to have huge trouble as a city. So we have to look to the future. The best way to protect ourselves from needing more and more budget one-shots is to prevent the damage in the first place. I agree with many who have said that this was not a once-in-a-lifetime storm, but a new fact of life. Our planet's getting warmer, more water is in the atmosphere, the seas are rising. The NASA satellites should have scared everybody. 300,000 square miles, the polar ice caps are 300,000 square miles less than the previous smaller size. So there's a real urgency to start planning for New York's long-term protection because we now face much more frequent storms and rising seas. Now, there's a small part of the Sandy bill that gives us that opportunity, and we must take advantage of it. It's a fraction of the billions we've secured, but maybe historians will look back and say it's the most valuable piece of the bill years from now. I'm talking about $20 million in funding for a comprehensive Army Corps coastal protection study that I insisted be added to the bill. The study will focus on the need for additional protection in New York Harbor and examine the feasibility of all coastal protection possibilities. The Army Corps, who are our experts, will examine structural storm surge barriers like seawalls, tide gates, pumping stations, and levees, but also non-structural ecosystem restoration options like dunes, beach nourishment, floodways, wetland, and marsh restoration. The scientists will look at all options out there and provide a range of options, some of which we can envision and some of which we have no idea we need right now, for how we protect our city in a smart way. Now, both New York City and New York State have started thinking about the long-term regional infrastructure plans with, I don't know how to pronounce it, Shay or someone will tell me, PLA New York City, PLA New York City, that's Mayor Bloomberg's plan. Plan New York City, oh, very good. And Governor Cuomo has his New York State 21 Commission working with the Rockefeller Foundation, and they should be commended. The mayor's office also has created a special initiative for rebuilding and resiliency that will issue its first findings in May. And all of these provide excellent starting points and prove the importance of thinking big and for the long term. But we can't have 3 or 4 separate plans in New York. There must be one comprehensive and central plan, and we need it soon. The Army Corps study will provide this, and it should be the main vehicle that will lead to the long-term protection of New York. The Army Corps study should be our North Star when it comes to protecting New York from future storms, and let me explain why. First, the Army Corps are experts on regional coastal protection. They can draw on years of engineering experience and know-how to provide recommendations based on the best science available. Second, delivering a truly regional protection plan will demand the resources of the federal government, and this study will result in specific recommendations that immediately lead to federally authorized projects. The Army Corps has a congressional mandate to deliver the types of projects the New York, New Jersey area need. Once we have a complete plan from a federal agency, it's going to make us much better positioned to make our case to get funding for Congress. And third, the experience of Louisiana and Mississippi working with the Army Corps after Katrina provide us with a real path forward. While the Army Corps should lead in the effort, it's got to be collaborative. We can all agree we want to avoid multiple competing plans, one from New York City, one from New York State, one from New Jersey. All of these groups should have input into the Army Corps plan. The Army Corps should work collaboratively with them, but the Army Corps has to draw up the plan. As I said, the city and state have done a good job in their initial efforts to think about how New York rebuilds. They can work on their own plans, but should feed them into the Army Corps study. And the Army Corps must convene with these local stakeholders to strategize intelligently and be inclusive of their priorities. The process cannot happen exclusively at a federal level. The Army Corps plan will only work with the cooperation of our city and our two states. So the Army Corps has to avoid the bureaucratic arrogance too common in federal agencies. Second, there should be special priority in these plans to core business districts. Local collaboration is important because we don't want the Army Corps to operate in a vacuum. One priority of utmost importance to me, and I'm sure to many of you in this room, is the protection of our central business districts. Our central business districts, where people work and how they get there, are the lifeblood of the city's economic engine. Look what happened after Sandy. Much of Lower Manhattan's Class A and Class B office space was closed for business for weeks and months. Some are still closed now. In Brooklyn, the burgeoning tech community of Dumbo had over 500 companies, mainly startups and creative firms, that relocated for similar periods of time. At the Brooklyn Navy Yard alone, dozens and dozens of small businesses suffered $75 million in losses to equipment, inventory, and business interruption. If we're going to maintain our top spot as the destination for finance, entrepreneurs, and world-class talent, we have to do everything to signal we will stay open for business. And we have to make it clear to those businesses that are now might be questioning staying in or more likely moving in. Someone who's starting a business says, maybe I ought not come to New York. Look what happened at Sandy. Look what might happen in the future. We have to make them understand that protecting our business communities and our business districts will be a top priority. Now, we can't expect central business districts like Lower Manhattan to be raised on stilts, but we need this study to focus on how we can protect those areas to prevent the devastation we saw downtown and all the way as far up 30th Street, Bellevue, and NYU. And by the way, the damage extended all the way up the Hudson as far as to Kingston, New York. So we need all of that to be studied. The Army Corps must recognize how important central business districts are to New York, and I'm calling on the Corps to do this. Finally, New York City leaders will be needed to push Congress to authorize billions of additional dollars to inoculate us against future Sandys and the effects of global warming. Again, I say we cannot wait. I spent a good deal of time discussing the need for a study, but the real linchpin is how we go from an Army Corps study of $20 million to start construction of protection projects that the Army Corps recommends. We've hired the architect. We now have to secure the funding for the contractor, and this is phase 2. We need to get to work on it immediately. We got to make sure the Army Corps study is completed in a timely fashion. The legislation says they have to have it done in 24 months. I'm suggesting to them 18. They say they can do it. We also have to learn from the experiences of different experiences of Louisiana and Mississippi. Both were devastated in Katrina. Louisiana put together a plan and got funding, $15 billion. They are much more storm-proof than we are. They're in a low-lying area. They have lots of storms. Mississippi had a study done, and it hasn't been funded yet. They're naked. And you may have read that New Orleans is beginning to come back. People have faith again in that city. Now, they didn't lose the faith in New York the way they did in New Orleans, but still, it's a model for us. Louisiana is going to be strongly protected against future storms and rising oceans. Mississippi, thus far, will not. So we have to be ready to mobilize and mobilize quickly, because the big job will be getting the billions and billions of dollars in addition to the $60 billion that we need to protect ourselves. So our fight's just beginning. It's a fight all New Yorkers need to be part of. We're going to need to rally the same forces we did to get the $60 billion, both on the governmental side and the business and non-governmental and labor side. Labor unions were extremely helpful in this as well. And there's no greater task facing us. Let's face it. This is the most beautiful city in the world. Every one of us who lives here loves it. It's in our bones. But 10 years from now, we don't want to stand here and have conventional wisdom that New York is now vulnerable because it didn't plan for the future and it's not protected. And people ought to go somewhere else, further inland. In 10 years, we don't want businesses to say we want to locate somewhere else. We've grown from 7 million people to 8.5 million people in 20 years. That is the greatest thing. We don't want all those young people who are coming now to say 10 years from now, I won't come. So there's an urgency here. And in conclusion, what I'd like to say is this. I'll give you a quote. This is hard. It's not glamorous, but it's really, really important. And Max Weber said this about government. It's one of my favorite little paragraphs. Politics is a strong and slow boring of hard boards. It takes both passion and perspective. Certainly, all historical experience confirms the truth that man would not have attained the possible unless time and time again he had reached out for the impossible. But to do that, a man must be a leader, and not only a leader, but a hero as well in a very sober sense of the word. And even those who are neither leaders nor heroes must arm themselves with the steadfastness of heart which can brave even the crumbling of all hopes. This is necessary right now, or men will not be able to attain even that which is possible today. So let's make sure the Phase 1 is spent well, but let's get moving on Phase 2 to protect the city we love. We can do it. Thank you.
Chuck, thank you for your leadership, and I think everybody in this room is up to the task. There's no question about it. We've done it before, and we will do it again. The Senator has agreed to answer a few questions. I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative. Couple of issues related to Sandy, and not related to Sandy, but related to insurance. Flood insurance, renewal of policies, particularly for areas like downtown and other parts of the city that have been hit, and getting that access to vital insurance. The markets have tightened up, costs have gone up. What do you see for the future of that? And also a big issue for Manhattan and downtown, terrorism risk insurance. TRIA is coming due next year. Can you give us an update on that also?
Well, the flood insurance program, as Jerry and Joe could tell you, they've worked on it as I have, and they did a great job on Sandy as well, needs some revisions. It needs revisions in its implementation, but it also needs revisions in how it is distributed and issued and how it works for businesses, which is different than how it works for homeowners. Right now, flood insurance is not living up to its potential, and people who have paid thousands and thousands of dollars over the years are not getting the dollars that they need, mainly because they farm it out to private appraisers and private insurance companies who were totally unprepared for something of the magnitude of Sandy. So that has to be done. And the second thing on flood insurance that has to be done is we need a better business model, because it's not working for our businesses very well. In terms of TRIA, TRIA, for those of you who may not remember, is terrorism insurance. And one of the great problems, we face so many problems after 9/11, most of which we've overcome. That's why we're doing so well, one of the reasons. And buildings couldn't get insured, and that meant that companies couldn't get construction loans to build because they figured, God forbid, there's another terrorist incident. We don't know how to, insurance companies said, we don't know how to insure against that. We don't have a track record. At least with floods, they have some record over the decades of where it occurs, how often it occurs. Even those records are not very good anymore. And TRIA worked. It had the federal government be a backstop. It took us a while to get it done, but it's expiring in a year. And we cannot let people say, well, 9/11, that's 12 years ago. Talk to a bank officer that's thinking of lending for a new building, a new office tower in Manhattan. They're going to say, what happens if there's another terrorist incident? Who's going to insure the building? And then go talk to an insurance company and say, not us. So we're going to need to renew TRIA. It's really important, and I know in the House my colleagues will start on it. We're going to start right away in the Senate to try and get TRIA done. I've already asked Jack Lew, the new Treasury Secretary, to start thinking about how and when the administration is going to propose renewal.
Regarding Sandy is absolutely...
Say that into the microphone, Jeff. I was worried about your question. I still am, but this is a nice thing.
No, I was just saying my former boss, Al D'Amato, it was always said about him that nobody works the system the way he does. And I have to tell you that the way our senator worked the system on Sandy, it's masterful. If you know the system, masterful. What I wanted to ask, and I asked it with real sincerity, I'm not looking to create discomfort. There's a wonderful woman here that is a witness that I'm not looking to create discomfort.
You better watch out.
You expressed the concern of all New Yorkers, all Americans, regarding the disturbing views of Senator Hagel, and you met with him.
Yes.
But in the ensuing weeks, his performance has been abysmal on issues generally.
Right.
Aside from wanting to support the president, no small consideration, why do you feel the Senate should still support him?
How did I know your question would be on Hagel? Okay, let me answer it. Look, I had doubts about Senator Hagel when his name was first floated. I voiced those doubts publicly on TV, on Meet the Press and other places. And the president called me and said, before you come out with any decision, please sit down and talk to him. That was only fair. I spent 90 minutes with him. I asked him about all the things he had said that troubled me, trouble you, trouble many of us who were supporters of Israel. And he answered them very well. Every one of the things that people are pointing out, he said 7 or 8 years ago, 2005, 6, 7. And Iran was a different place in those days. So when he said he didn't really think we needed unilateral sanctions, he said it's a different world. Of course we need them. He said, he never said that Hezbollah wasn't a terrorist organization. He just refused a letter. He doesn't like to sign letters to foreign governments. He said, of course, it's obvious in the last 7 years. They've made it clear with the rockets into Israel that they're a terrorist organization. And most importantly, I asked him about a nuclear Iran. And he said that would be devastating for the U.S. and for Israel. And the military option is one that he would recommend being used if, God forbid, sanctions fail. He struck me as sincere. And, you know, you have to be sitting there at the meeting, obviously, but I also told him when he used the word Jewish lobby, what it meant to Jewish people. I told him what a double standard is, that, you know, the Jewish people throughout the centuries had suffered a double standard. Everyone could be a farmer except Jewish people. Everyone could live in Moscow except Jewish people. I said, when everyone else can lobby, but all of a sudden when those of us who are pro-Israel lobby, it's a negative, that's a double standard. And I'm sure you didn't mean it, but it harkens to the old days. And he really was, you know, he almost had tears in his eyes when he understood that. So I believe that he will be good. And here's what's really interesting. Not a major Jewish organization has come out against Hagel. Not AIPAC, whose sole job is to protect Israel. Not ADL. Not AJC. Because they realize that at this point in time, you need to have unity between Israel and America. The main fight on Hagel is coming from the neocons, a group you know well. And they resent Hegel's apostasy on Iraq. You may remember he was the first, the neocons sort of helped push Iraq. And Hegel was one of the first Republicans to say Iraq isn't working. And he was right. But that's where it's coming from. So I think that I have no qualms about my position. And as you can see, now Senators McCain and Graham and Alexander have said they may not vote for him, but they'll vote to let the vote come forward, because every president has gotten his pick We haven't had a filibuster on any cabinet appointment, and I think he'll be nominated, he'll be confirmed, and I think he'll surprise you on the issue of Israel about how strong he is.
Dawn.
Hi, Senator Schumer. I'm Dawn Barber. I co-founded New York Tech Meetup. I'm wondering what you think the role of the technology community is for the future of New York.
Well, I think it's one of our great things. And, you know, as a New Yorker, I just, you know, I'm a competitive New Yorker. So I like to see us do better than everybody else. And, you know, when I saw that there were more VC, more venture capital money coming to New York tech than any other place but Silicon Valley, and the percentage increase that's going to New York exceeds Silicon Valley, it made me feel great. This is one of our great futures. And it's not illusory the way it was in 2000. It's much stronger and deeper. I talked to experts in California. Eric Schmidt, the head of Google, told me that he gets more productivity per worker out of the 3,000 Google workers here than out of the 12,000, you know, per person or per dollar, than out of the 13,000 people in Mountain View in their headquarters. So we have the big companies locating here and growing. We have even more exciting, the startups really blossoming. We have the money here. I thought Bloomberg's proposal on Roosevelt Island is just superb, because you talk to the tech people, and one of the things we're missing is engineers. But, you know, even before it actually begins, we are seeing engineers and high-tech people come to New York, because now we have a critical mass. So it really is our future, and one of the things I do, I meet with the tech community all the time on the immigration bill. One of the things they need, of course, is well-trained people, and one of the proposals that will be in our immigration bill, it's no secret, is that if you are a MA, BA, or PhD in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, that you can get a green card attached to your diploma. And these really brilliant, hardworking people, many of whom have created companies that employ thousands, will come here. And that's great for America, but it's best for New York, because we're the most hospitable place for immigrants anywhere in the nation.
Chuck, I'm going to ask the final question. What is the status of the immigration reform? We've heard different things in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, John McCain and I are leading a bipartisan group, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, to try and come up with a proposal. And we are making great progress. There's an understanding on both sides that for the good of America, we should pass a bill. Our Republican colleagues, who have been very much afraid of being labeled, you know, soft on illegal immigrants, amnesty, and all this other stuff, realize from the elections of 2012 that if they continue to be regarded in the Hispanic community as anti-immigrant, the Republican Party doesn't have much of a future. But even more importantly than that, the 4 Republicans in the room, and I'd say this about all 4 of them, Senator McCain, Senator Rubio, Senator Graham, and Senator Flake, have real courage. They know this is good for America, and they're willing to take some brickbats to move forward. Now, we on the Democratic side are going to have to admit we're not going to get everything we want. And as Max Weber said, politics is the boring of small boards together. And so we're going to have to make some compromises too. And many of those of us who are pro-immigration are not going to get everything we want. But I think there's a view on our side, enough of having perfect bills that don't get anywhere, and 11 million people still continue to live in the shadows. Our policy on legal immigration is backward. We turn away the people we need, and people come in who are not the people we need, you know, economically speaking. So I'm an optimist by nature, as you know, but I am really optimistic that we can come together and get an immigration bill, certainly through the Senate. And if we get a good number of Republicans to vote for it in the Senate, it'll put huge pressure on the House to move forward. And I would guess that they're going to end up going along as well. So this is one of the bright spots in Washington right now, where both sides are coming together on one of the most important issues facing America.
Chuck, thank you very, very much.